Hey gang, want to talk with you a little bit today about iron sights as it relates to the different variations. We're going to talk a little bit today about the different heights on the sights, as well as blackout sights, tritium and fiber optic and things like that. First, let's talk about the various heights of the sights. Let's start really basic. We have iron sights with no optic or anything like that. This is your standard run-of-the-mill 229, no frills. Okay, so let's talk about that. So on this one, we have your standard height iron sights. As you'll know, the standard height sights, they're not too far raised up from the top of the slide. Actually, that's actually good for that particular purpose, because what happens is the height over bore on this particular case with regards to the dots are really low. You're going to get essentially the best read on the aim. Now, most people don't know that your iron sights from the factory are zeroed for 25 yards. But because the height over bore is so low on these things, it's negligible where you aim and the impact, i.e. if you're at 5 yards and you line up your sights perfectly, you're essentially going to hit your target perfectly. Same thing at 25 yards because of the height over bore or the very short height over bore. As the height of the sights go higher and higher, that becomes more of an issue. We'll talk about that later. But the benefits of having standard iron sights is really when you're not running a red dot or something like that on your slide. So if you're just running traditional irons and you're gun Amish, standard height sights are a-okay. Let's move on to suppressor height sights and things like that. So on the actually, I'm going to go with this one here. So on this particular firearm, on this 320, we have your Romeo 1 Pro mounted on there. And this is actually sights from SIG that are not quite suppressor height sights. They are in between suppressor height and standard. Okay, and the design plan with this from SIG was to make that way that these sights can talk effectively with this red dot, or say your Leupold Delta Point Pro or whatever other red dot. And these particular sights do not go really that far past the height of the plane of this red dot. Meaning that if I were to use my iron sights through this window, the iron sights would be really low on that window. And when I'm actually using the red dot, it is very easy to ignore the iron sights. They don't get in the way. But these sights are just high enough so that way if my red dot fails, like the battery dies or something like that, I can easily use these iron sights and keep on cruising from there. Furthermore, and just this particular red dot on the SIG Romeo 1 Pro, there's a cutout here right by where the adjustment is for the up and down. That is conveniently talking to the rear iron sight. So actually, you got a little divot that's cut out over here, lowering that plane. That makes the rear sight notch a lot cleaner, and you can actually see that front sight a lot better. So another thing about the Romeo 1 Pro is that there is a cutout on the plane over here that basically lowers the surface area, so that way the rear sight, you have a clearer path and can see that front sight a lot easier. So also having the right dot talking with your sights is important as well. But this would be a good sight if you want not to have your iron sights impede your view of the red dot. Then we have what we call a absolute co-witness style sight. So on this one, you have your Trigicon Type 2, and on this one you have your true suppressor height sights on this particular firearm. Now, with the way that this is mounted and everything, the rear sight, the front sight is going to have an absolute co-witness on the window of this red dot. What that means is that I'm going to see essentially the sights middle of the window. So the top of my front sight post, top of my rear sight notch is all going to be in the middle of the window of this red dot. Okay, so some people prefer that, some people don't. It becomes a personal preference. You can certainly train yourself to even still have that, ignore the iron sights and still use the red dot. So easy day there. But this is where you have an absolute co-witness. So these are the different types of heights on the sights. Now let's talk about the tritium versus not tritium and fiber optics. I'm going to actually use this one to illustrate my point. So on this particular firearm, we have the tritium night sights that go on this one. Now the tritium night sights, they're great for if you're having to use iron sights at night, of course, say going into a dark room and things like that. That doesn't really impede, actually it doesn't impede at all, with your usage of the red dot at night. Okay, so a lot of people have questions about that, and they say, oh, I don't want my night sights to get in the way of my using the red dot at night. That's really not a thing. Okay, where it becomes a factor is if you're using NVGs. If you're using NVGs, then the tritium inside of these night sights are going to show up in your view with your NVGs. You're going to get a laser light show in your NVGs. You'll have the dot, which you'll see. Okay, you'll have the front sight and then the rear sight. You're going to see a bunch of dots. So unless you got that down, that's going to probably bother you. I still run tritium night sights when running NVGs, but what I like to do is actually take some black electrical tape when I know I'm going to be running night stuff and essentially cover the surface area that has the tritium on the rear sight and front sight, and it's easy day from there. Now, if you don't want to do that, this is where blackout sights come into play. So as you'll see here, we have blackout sights, and whether you're running NVGs or not, you're not going to get any tritium or anything like that. The thing about this is that now with the blackout sights, let's just say you're using normal daytime, you're not referencing either a front sight dot or the rear dot, so you're not looking at those three dots lining up. What you're doing is you're lining up shapes, which is totally easy, totally doable, but that becomes a personal preference. What I find is folks that like to shoot with both eyes open using iron sights prefer the blackout sights because all they're doing is they're looking at their target, they're lining up shapes, and they're not getting distracted by dots and things like that. So this is where blackout sights come into play. So you're lining up shapes. Now the benefit again of the tritium, even during the daytime, is that you still have dots you can line up during the day. You have dots you can line up at night, and then of course if you're not running NVGs or a red dot, having the tritium at night is helpful because if it's dark out, say your house is dark or whatever, you're not quite looking at shapes at that point. You need a reference point of some kind. So different things with regards to what the usage is. So to kind of sum this up, if I have a firearm for home defense and I'm not worried about using it with NVGs or anything like that, I actually tend to prefer having the tritium night sights with the red dot and so on because it gives me more versatility. If I'm using it for, say, night vision, things like that, that becomes a different factor, and where blackout sights may become relevant there, so that way I don't have to put tape over it and things like that. And then the height of the sights is basically your setup. If you're not going to run red dots or anything mounted on the top of your slide, standard height sights are great. If you are going to run red dots, getting the higher sights so that way it could talk to or over the red dot is great. And if you live in a free state and you have a suppressor, well, you need suppressor height sights. What I do find, a couple things that kind of are cringy, is folks will have a red dot on their firearm, but then run standard sights in and around it. Now, if that red dot goes down, you have nothing. Okay, so that's what I see sometimes, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad and wrong and this and that. A little cringy because you have no fail-safe. But, I mean, if you have a very reliable red dot and that's not really a care for you, then, hey, such is life. But that's where you have irons on there. Might as well just take the irons off because they're just not working for you. Another thing that we see is, and this is really depending on how the slide is cut, we see. But a lot of times we'll see folks mount their rear sight in front of their red dot. Now, I mean, there's really, you can do both. What I find though, from a more of an engineering perspective, is that the having the iron sights in front of the red dot, depending on which iron sights you're running, what you've done is you've decreased the sight radius on those sights. Now, when the manufacturer makes various iron sights, they make it with a particular sight radius in mind. That's why, like for instance, when you buy, say, night vision sights, they are set for a particular firearm. Say SIG, Glock, this, that, the other, and they have a particular sight radius variable that they're working with. Which what that means is that as the closer the front and rear sight get together, okay, you're going to see that the front sight and the rear sight line up differently. What happens is if that front sight is too close, it's going to fill that rear sight aperture so much that you're not going to have that light in between. You're not going to be able to tell as well if you are veering to the left, to the right, or in things like that. It's going to really mess that up. So you want to make sure that if you are going to mount that rear sight in front, which personally I don't know why, that you are accounting for the changed sight radius on that. Most times those sights don't work as well, and you have a messed up front sight radius. Anyways, mounting it on the rear is actually, in my opinion, the most beneficial. Because if, say for example, you have to dismount this red dot or do whatever, you have true sight radius on this, you have the rear sight or front sight notch, typically that's standard from the factory. What happens is when you have a notch cut out for the rear sight that's in front of the red dot, now that's basically a notch that has been cut out aftermarket. So you got to make sure that that's good. Sometimes if it's not cut exactly right, you'll have a loose rear sight and then you'll have movement. The other thing is that the real estate between the red dot and the rear sight, the amount of metal that is on that notch, it can't be that thick. So what happens is now you have your red dot mounted all the way to the rear, and then you have some real estate over here. So I like the iron sights in the rear because the manufacturer has enough meat, so to speak, with metal that rear notch is actually really secure, and that red dot is mounted actually forward. Now, a couple considerations when that red dot is mounted forward due to the iron sights is that, do you have basically that loaded chamber indicator or that hole where you can actually see through the top as your chamber indicator? If you have something like that, like on an MMP, free state MMP or something like that, then you'll have gases escape up into the lens of your red dot. So you'll have to just wipe it down every now and again. That is a consideration to note as well. So the variations with regards to the heights on the iron sights and tritium versus not tritium blackout sights. And finally, the thing about fiber optics. I really didn't talk about fiber optics, folks. And nothing against fiber optics, but I find that it was good for a little while. But with the advancement in technology, the dawn of red dots and the usage of red dots, I find that fiber optics is kind of a thing of the past. And the reason why is because basically what you have on that front sight is that you have a bracket that holds that plastic fiber optic rod. Now, that rod, most people don't know, is that rod is actually slipped in, cut, and basically you take a lighter or some heating device and you melt either end to kind of make it wider, and that essentially secures the fiber optic onto the bracket. What happens is, with regards to suppressor height sights and the need for a longer fiber optic, there's more to jolt and things like that, especially if you're running rapid fire. I find that just in general, the fiber optics run loose. So if you're running your gun like you're supposed to, you tend to run those fiber optics out. Not a particular fan of it. It also requires ambient light for them to work. Otherwise, you're not going to see them at night in true darkness. So there is that. It's not a night sight. It's just fiber optic. It glows during the daytime or when there's ambient light. So it's kind of a one-sided thing. I prefer the Tritium because it works daytime, nighttime, all the time. So those are just a couple things regarding fiber optics. I don't have one displayed here today. I just don't have a fiber optic gun. So there's that. But those are some things about that. So sights, heights, blackout, Tritium, you choose. If you think all gun laws are an infringement and you live behind the enemy lines in the People's Republic of California, then check out our Unconvicted Felons t-shirt. We came out with this t-shirt design for you where most of us are fed up with the situation here in California. So check it out. Check out our website. Awesome t-shirt coming at you. And our new line of 2 arms where it stands for 2A Rights Matter. So check out our new t-shirt and help us feed our dog.